It is our pleasure to be joined by our good friend Dan Wos, author, Good Gun, Bad Guy, now Good Gun, Bad Guy 2. Good morning, sir.
Fellas, how are you? Hey, it's always great to talk to you, and not just because you're the voice of freedom, but because you're the voice of reason.
Right, reasonable, and justified. It's part of the definition of vindicated.
That's right.
You know, I was wondering what we were going to talk about today, so I wanted to make sure that we didn't miss the opportunity. So I got in touch with Chris Christie's people, and I made sure he threw this bump stock ban on the way out the door.
I saw that briefly. I didn't read all the details on it, but you know, it's pretty typical of a Republican, of a liberal pretending to be a Republican. So, you know, what can you do? And the thing is, we can't let these little infringements happen, not because gun owners are married to their bump stocks, because the truth is most gun owners don't use bump stocks.
Most people don't know anything about them. And
true.
You started by saying, look, I don't know the details, and you know what? This is one of those things that I don't need to know the details, because what I do know is when this narrative started post Las Vegas, if you looked at some of the language that was in the bills being thrown around, they were slippery slopes that a reasonable person could look at and interpret as this is a move on semi-automatic firearms.
Exactly, and ammo, and then pistols and concealed carry. They'll try everything. So the answer to this nonsense that they're pulling is don't give them an inch. Never give them an inch. There is no reason why good people in this country should be restricted to any firearms. The thing that they should be focused on is the bad guys. And I know Chris Christie has a city called Newark. My car was broken into and robbed in Newark. He really should be focused on Newark, because that's where the bad guys are. And the bump stock thing does nothing but give the anti-gunners a good taste in their mouth to move forward with other nonsense.
Yeah, and how recurring a theme is this? And you're a guy who is neck deep. You are immersed in the gun debate. And what sort of a recurring theme is this where we keep having this conversation about, well, we need to make some laws. We need to make some laws. We need to regulate this and govern that. But in truth, the only people that are impacted by laws are law-abiding people.
Well, that is the truth. We know it. They even know it. They understand that. But that's not that. But they have to keep pushing. They have to keep pushing their narrative, and they have to keep going for all these things, because ultimately they really do want to end gun ownership in this country. And you know, we talk about the Second Amendment. I talk about, you know, my gun owner friends will say, well, we have the Second Amendment. What's the big deal? Who cares what they say, what they think? But it's a huge deal that we care, and it's a huge deal that we rebut them. It's a huge deal that we expose their hypocrisy, because the narrative, the narrative and the landscape that we see in society is important, because that influences the thought process of people watching. And those people go to the voting polls, and they will vote based on fear, mostly based on fear. If they're scared of guns, if they're scared of, you know, whatever it is that the politicians are pushing, whatever the cause du jour is, they will vote. They'll vote accordingly based on their fear and their emotion. So if you can scare people, scare the hell out of them, scare them to death about guns, they're going to vote accordingly.
Well, and Dan, I love the fact that you bring up that they are actually aware of the fallacies to the narrative that they are trying to propagate, unto the American people and unto unbeknownst, viewers of their content and whatnot. And, we've talked to you a couple times over the last year or so, and we, had you on the air when your first book, Good Gun, Bad Guy, was first released. And that was really, your story being put into writing of how you were an anti-gunner growing up. You grew up in a family that, you did have exposure to firearms, but in your your young 20s, growing up, through that time period in your life, you really turned to an anti-gun stance. And now you've come out with this new book, Good Gun, Bad Guy 2. Tell me a little bit about, because I know the first book was really, dissecting the ideology, the mindset of anti-gunners. And now this book is more focused on giving the people the tools to fight back against some of these anti-gunners and their stances. Tell us a little bit about your new book.
Well, I can tell you a couple things. A couple of the chapters that are pretty important. One chapter is called Fake News, and I know that term has been used a lot, and it's funny. We all get a chuckle out of it, but it's a real thing. And if it wasn't for Donald Trump to bring that to the forefront, we wouldn't really be talking about it. We would accept the narrative that's been propagated. So, Fake News chapter will help people understand the strategies that the media is doing. It helps them understand and see how the fake narrative unfolds before their very eyes and without them really even knowing, because this stuff influences people as we watch it on TV. Another one is truth versus politics. When they can take the lies and use them strictly for their own politics, their own political positioning. See, and I want to go back just a bit and explain something. When we talk about the anti-gunners, we're talking about two different groups of people. We're talking about the anti-gunners who are generally scared of guns and go along and believe all the nonsense that they see about guns in the media. They'll go along with it, and they're out there in the streets cheering, yes, more gun regulations, they got their picket signs and all that stuff. Now, there's another group that I call the anti-Second Amendment radicals. They know exactly what's going on, and they know that they're lying, and they know that they're manipulating people, non-gun owners, regular people, and convincing them to join their camp. And so the difference between an anti-gunner and an anti-Second Amendment radical is knowing that they're lying, but not caring and continuing to perpetuate the lie.
And Dan, we got to take a quick break. Can you hang around with us for one more segment, my friend?
Sure thing.
Excellent deal. Because something that one of the parts of this, one of the more refined strategies to change people's minds and to use examples to give them talking points came out right after Vegas, and I think I have found it. I know we used it back then, and it was David Frum, and it was. What he said is actually scary, and you go back to where your friends are saying, hey, we got the Second Amendment, what's the big deal? The big deal is it is under assault. It is absolutely under assault. Stick around. Dan Wos, author, Good Gun, Bad Guy, now Good Gun, Bad Guy 2. He is a unique insight into the strategies of the folks who want to deprive you of your Second Amendment rights. Let there be no mistake, folks. Stick around. We'll be right back. Take a quick break. Dan Wos is going to stay with us. You're listening to the Voice of Freedom today on Freedom 93.3. I'm Greg Marr Jr. He's Bobby Mack, and Dan Wos is on the phone with us. We talk guns and gun rights. On the other side of this short break, do not move a muscle. In the interest of time, I'm going to jump back in here really fast. It's starting to drizzle outside. The rain is moving into the area thus far. Does not look like there's a frozen component to it, so we've escaped the slush puppy delivery in the listening area. But there's lots of it around. Be advised, be aware. It's going to be chilly today. It's about as warm as it's going to get out there right now. Sun will come up a little bit, give you a little bit of relief, but it won't feel like anything if there's a breeze. And tonight, it's going to be frigid, dangerously cold in our neck of the woods. Freedom Forecast brought to you by the Overhead Door Company of the capital city, 850-386-DOOR, 386-DOOR. We're talking to Dan Wos. He is the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy, and now Good Gun, Bad Guy 2, shares with you his unique insight into the strategies, the narrative, and some of these are really well refined angles of the anti-gunners, and we were talking, and I've got a piece of what passes for a reasonable conversation about the gun debate in this country. This was on the heels of the Vegas shootings. Here's this audio.
The polling shows that most Americans agree with the Congresswoman on this.
Well, I wish that were true, but I think when you face the reality of this problem, it just isn't. That one of the things that we have seen over the past decade is a rising support among Americans for ever broader definitions of gun rights in exactly the way that Justice Berger warned us against. But that is where the country is. And so it makes this, and this is a really painful thing to say, these technical fixes that people look for, maybe if we banned this implement or regulated that implement, there is something very wrong with the American gun culture. 3% of the people own 50% of the weapons in this country. I mean, a tiny number of people own vast numbers of weapons. Until you persuade people that it is just dangerous to themselves, their children. You're not a good parent if you have a gun in your house. You're not protecting your family. You're a bad parent if you have a gun in the house. Until you drill that idea into people's heads and persuade them to change the way we changed about cigarettes and seatbelts, these technical fixes aren't going to accomplish a lot. In public opinion, you can make it look like it's on your side.
There it is. Dan, that is alarming, troubling stuff to me.
Oh, man. Yeah. You know, and I hear this stuff all the time. And if people don't pay attention, they will believe this nonsense. It's all nonsense. Everything he did. Now, just listening to that little piece, I was able to pull out a few different techniques and strategies that he was using. First of all, he says we have to face reality. Okay. Nobody wants to be illogic, and nobody wants to be living in a non-reality world. So they're going to listen to that. They're going to say, okay, yes, let's face reality. The minute he says that, now he's got your attention, and he can say tech fixes aren't working. 3% of gun owners own 50% of the guns, which is a lie. That's not true. It's nowhere near true. Almost 5% of people on average across the country are concealed carriers. Okay, so now there have actually been studies that show that 30% and upward are gun owners. 30 to 40, even 40. Some people have even said 45%. So lies right there. So, but he captures your attention, wants you to live in reality, and then gives you a lie. Then he says we need to drill it into their heads. We need to persuade people. This is what it's all about. So he gave up all his tools, all his strategies, and all his tactics, and then he hits you where it hurts. He says people who own guns are bad parents. Yep. Nobody wants to be a bad parent. Our kids are our most important thing. That's why we are gun owners, is to protect our families, protect our kids. And so this is a perfect example of an anti-Second Amendment radical. This is a guy who knows exactly what he's talking about, and he knows he's lying. But yet he perpetrates and perpetuates the narrative because that's important to him politically. And it's important that he recruits as many people as possible to sign on.
And let me jump in there. I heard two things in there as well. He opened it by quoting someone very smart, saying, and this Supreme Court, this justice said this, and just exactly what he warned us about. Then he goes to that invitation to everyone to let's talk about what's real. Let's talk about reality. And then he through all those tactics you mentioned, and he gets to the heartstrings, to the gut punch. You're not a good parent if you have a gun in the house. And he said something else that I thought is very, very insightful in analyzing this and realizing how dangerous it is. He says, just like seatbelts. Well, of course, we've conceded that seatbelts make you safer when you employ them. And then he says, just like cigarettes, we've conceded that ground. Cigarettes are dangerous to your health. And so he chooses those two things and then throws that whole bad parent thing on the end of there. And wow.
Yeah, so you can associate this with stuff that you are familiar with. You are familiar with cigarettes. You are familiar with seatbelts. So he found a way to associate gun ownership with, lung cancer. This is the type of propaganda, the type of rhetoric that people don't always catch. Right up front, you said smart. We talked about how he quoted someone very smart. Now, if you look, the liberal progressive movement is based on that. They pride themselves on being smart, and they try to paint everyone else as dumb or not smart or whatever. Use all the terms that they come up with. So if you're, for the people who want to be perceived as smart, they're going to go to that table. They're going to want to sit at that popular table. And this is another tactic of recruiting people who don't know any better, don't critically think gun stuff, and that's technical word right there, stuff.
It's scientific term.
Scientific, yeah. So this is to recruit people who don't understand guns and don't critically think about this stuff. So it's perfect. He's got everything there. He talks about being smart. He talks about he talks about facing reality. He talks about how they're going to persuade people. This comes from the Eric Holder School of Propaganda. Let me read something. You got a second here? Let me read something. A quote from my book, Good Gun, Bad Guy.
Okay, we've got about 60 seconds.
Okay, let me try to get through this.
Okay.
Eric Holder. I've also asked the school board to make part of every day some kind of anti-violence, anti-gun message. Every day, every school, at every level. One thing that I think is clear with young people and with adults as well is that we just have to be repetitive about this. It's not enough to simply have a catchy ad on a Monday and then only do it every Monday. We need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way. Eric Holder, 1995.
Ladies and gentlemen, his name's Dan Wos. His newest book, Good Gun, Bad Guy 2. Dan, where can folks contact you, get in touch with you, and learn what's going on with you and coming up next?
Well, they can go to goodgunbadguy.net or goodgunbadguy.com or search Good Gun Bad Guy on Amazon.
He's Dan Wos. He's our good guy. Thanks for joining us this morning, my friend.
Thanks, fellas. Glad to be here and hope to talk to you again soon.
Yes, sir. Let me ask you, folks, where are you hearing this kind of stuff? Where are you hearing a way to dissect the arguments that you're being presented with that are intended to persuade you, to guilt you, to convince you, and beat you into submission if necessary and deprive you of your rights? Right here on the Voice of Freedom Today, and we'll be back in mere moments. Stick around.